In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where civilizations rise and fall like cosmic tides, one truth remained absolute: humans were considered the universe's greatest mistake. Too stubborn to submit, too clever to ignore, and too dangerous to trust completely. When the Galactic Council labeled Earth a curiosity world and placed it under protective observation, they thought they had contained humanity's chaotic influence. They were wrong. What they didn't anticipate was that chaos, when properly directed, could reshape the very foundations of an empire. They certainly never expected that a single human's refusal to follow diplomatic protocol would lead to the most powerful alliance the galaxy had ever seen. Sometimes the greatest changes begin not with grand declarations or mighty fleets, but with one honest question asked at exactly the wrong moment to exactly the right person. Captain Marcus Chen had been in worse situations before, but none quite as diplomatically disastrous as this one. The crystalline walls of the Zephyrian throne room seemed to amplify every whispered conversation among the assembled dignitaries, creating a symphony of alien languages that his universal translator struggled to parse. Standing at attention in his dress uniform, he watched as representatives from 12 different species conducted what could generously be called negotiations and, more accurately described as ritualized insults. The Zephyrian Empire controlled nearly a quarter of the galaxy's trade routes, and their sudden decision to close borders to all human ships had sent shockwaves through Earth's fledgling interstellar commerce. Marcus had been chosen for this mission not because of his diplomatic skills, which were admittedly limited, but because he had somehow managed to talk his way out of 3 different interspecies incidents without starting a war. The brass figured if anyone could navigate Zephyrian politics, it would be the captain who once convinced a Thoraxian hive queen that humans weren't actually trying to steal her eggs when they collected chicken eggs for breakfast. The throne room itself was a marvel of engineering and artistry. Walls of living crystal grew in spiraling patterns that seemed to shift and flow when viewed from different angles. Bioluminescent plants created pools of soft light throughout the vast chamber, while the ceiling opened to reveal the twin moons of Zephyr Prime hanging in the purple sky. It would have been beautiful if not for the palpable tension that filled the air like static electricity before a storm. At the center of it all sat the Zephyrian royal family on thrones carved from single pieces of starfall crystal. Emperor Thaxus dominated the central throne, his 4 arms adorned with the ceremonial bands that marked his authority over billions of subjects across dozens of worlds. His skin held the deep blue coloration that marked pure Zephyrian bloodlines, and his 6 eyes moved independently as they tracked the various conversations happening throughout the chamber. To his left sat Prince Wardhack, heir apparent and known throughout the galaxy for his military innovations. The prince's scarred hide told stories of campaigns fought on the Rim worlds, and his reputation for tactical brilliance was matched only by his disdain for what he considered lesser species. But it was the figure to the Emperor's right that drew Marcus's attention despite his best efforts to focus on the diplomatic proceedings. Princess Lyralii possessed the ethereal beauty that Zephyrian nobility were known for, but there was something else about her that set her apart from every other royal Marcus had encountered in his travels. While the other royals displayed their status through elaborate clothing and excessive jewelry, she wore simple robes that seemed to shimmer with their own inner light. Her silver hair fell in waves that defied gravity, floating gently around her shoulders as if suspended in water. Most striking were her eyes, a deep violet that seemed to hold depths of intelligence and compassion that contrasted sharply with the cold calculation he saw in her father and brother. The princess had been studying him as well, Marcus realized with a start. Every time he glanced in her direction, those violet eyes were already focused on him with an intensity that made him simultaneously nervous and intrigued. There was something in her gaze that suggested she was seeing more than just another human diplomat stumbling through alien protocols. Ambassador Kelthera from Earth's diplomatic corps had spent the last 2 hours explaining humanity's position to increasingly hostile audiences. The aging career diplomat had handled first-contact situations across the galaxy, but even her considerable skills seemed insufficient for the current crisis. The Zephyrians had accused human merchants of violating trade agreements, smuggling restricted technologies, and showing disrespect to Zephyrian customs. Some of the accusations were true, Marcus admitted to himself. Humans had a tendency to push boundaries and test limits, traits that served them well in exploration but poorly in diplomacy. The patterns of human behavior demonstrate fundamental incompatibility with civilized commerce, declared Minister Xyloth, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones that made Zephyrian speech sound like music even when delivering insults. Your species lacks the discipline necessary for participation in galactic society. Ambassador Kelthera maintained her composure despite the obvious provocation. Minister Xyloth, while we acknowledge that some human merchants have operated outside established guidelines, we believe these incidents represent individual choices rather than species-wide characteristics. Humanity is committed to building positive relationships with all members of the galactic community. Prince Vorthak rose from his throne, his imposing presence commanding immediate attention. Commitment means nothing without the ability to enforce compliance within your own species. How can the Empire trust agreements with a government that cannot control its own citizens? The question hit uncomfortably close to home. Earth's democratic systems and emphasis on individual freedom did make it difficult to guarantee that every human would follow diplomatic protocols perfectly. Marcus had seen enough of human nature during his years in space to know that telling someone they couldn't do something was often the fastest way to ensure they would try it. Your Highness raises valid concerns, Ambassador Kelthera replied carefully. However, we believe that diversity of thought and approach often leads to innovative solutions that benefit all parties involved. Emperor Thaxus spoke for the first time since the formal proceedings had begun. His voice carried absolute authority that seemed to resonate in the crystalline walls themselves. Innovation becomes irrelevant when it threatens established order. The Zephyrian Empire has maintained stability and prosperity for 3,000 years through adherence to proven principles. We have no need for human chaos. Marcus felt something snap inside him at those words. He had spent his entire career watching humans prove themselves worthy of respect through actions rather than words, only to see that progress dismissed by beings who confused stagnation with stability. Before he could stop himself, he stepped forward and spoke. With respect, Your Imperial Majesty, chaos isn't always a bad thing. The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. Ambassador Kelthera's face went pale, and he could practically feel her calculating how much damage his outburst might have caused. The assembled dignitaries turned to stare at him with expressions ranging from shock to amusement to outright hostility. Emperor Thaxus leaned forward slightly, his 6 eyes focusing on Marcus with laser intensity. Explain yourself, human. There was no backing down now. Marcus had committed himself to this course of action, and running away would only make things worse. He straightened his shoulders and met the Emperor's gaze directly. Your Majesty, 3,000 years ago, the Zephyrian Empire was a single world with big dreams and bigger problems. Your ancestors didn't build this empire by following established protocols because those protocols didn't exist yet. They succeeded because they were willing to take risks, try new approaches, and, yes, create what others might have called chaos. Prince Vorthak's hand moved to the ceremonial weapon at his side. Are you suggesting that the Empire was built through the same undisciplined approach that characterizes human behavior? I'm suggesting that maybe what you call undisciplined is just a different way of thinking, Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the very real possibility that he was about to start an interstellar incident. Humans don't question authority because we lack respect. We question it because we want to understand. We push boundaries not to cause trouble, but because we believe there might be something better on the other side. Princess Lyralii spoke for the first time during the entire proceedings, her voice like silver bells in a gentle breeze. And, what do you believe is on the other side of our current boundaries, Captain Chen? The fact that she knew his name and rank surprised him, but Marcus pushed past his confusion to focus on her question. There was something in her tone that suggested genuine curiosity rather than challenge. Partnership, Your Highness. Not the kind where one side follows orders and the other gives them, but real partnership where both sides contribute their strengths to achieve something neither could accomplish alone. Preposterous, Minister Xyloth interjected. The Empire has achieved everything necessary for prosperity and security. Human contributions would serve only to introduce instability. Marcus shook his head. Minister, with all due respect, when was the last time the Zephyrian Empire made a genuine breakthrough in technology or expanded into new territories? When did you last solve a problem that had been considered impossible? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus knew he was pushing dangerous territory, but something about Princess Lyralii's expression encouraged him to continue. Humans are good at impossible things, he said, looking directly at her. We're good at finding solutions that nobody else thought to look for. We're good at building bridges between groups that have been enemies for centuries. And we're really good at refusing to accept that something can't be done just because it hasn't been done before. Emperor Thaxus rose slowly from his throne, and the entire chamber fell silent. His presence filled the room like a physical force, and Marcus suddenly understood why the Zephyrian Empire had remained stable for 3 millennia. This was not a being who tolerated challenges to his authority lightly. Captain Chen, you speak of partnership as if you have something of value to offer the Empire. What could humanity possibly provide that we cannot accomplish ourselves? It was the opening Marcus had been hoping for, the moment when diplomacy might still salvage something from his impulsive outburst. He thought about Ambassador Kelthera's careful preparations, the talking points they had rehearsed, the safe diplomatic responses that might preserve the possibility of future negotiations. Instead, he told the truth. Hope, Your Majesty. Humans are really good at hope. The Emperor's expression didn't change, but Marcus noticed that Princess Lyraliai's eyes widened slightly. Around the chamber, various dignitaries began whispering among themselves in languages his translator couldn't identify. Hope, Emperor Thaxus repeated, as if testing the concept. An abstract quality with no measurable value. Maybe, Marcus admitted. But hope is what drives innovation. Hope is what makes people willing to risk everything for the chance at something better. Hope is what turns impossible dreams into inevitable realities. Prince Vorthak stepped forward, his scarred features twisted into a sneer. Empty words from a species that has barely begun to explore its own galactic neighborhood. What possible understanding could you have of the challenges facing a true interstellar civilization? The contempt in the prince's voice sparked something defensive in Marcus's chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. Getting angry now would undo whatever small progress he might have made. Your Highness, you're absolutely right that humans are newcomers to galactic civilization. We don't have the Empire's 3,000 years of experience or accumulated wisdom. But sometimes a fresh perspective can see solutions that experience has taught us to ignore. Such as? Princess Lyraliai asked softly. Marcus turned to face her fully, noting that her question had drawn sharp looks from both her father and brother. There was definitely something happening here beyond simple diplomatic negotiations, but he couldn't quite identify what it was. Such as questioning assumptions that have been accepted for so long they're not even recognized as assumptions anymore. Humans are good at asking awkward questions like, why does it have to be this way? And, what if we tried something completely different? Dangerous questions, Minister Xyloth observed. Questions that lead to instability and chaos. Questions that led to every major advancement in Zephyrian history, Marcus countered. Your ancestors asked those same questions when they developed faster-than-light travel, when they created the first interstellar governments, when they built the trade networks that form the foundation of your current prosperity. Emperor Thaxus remained silent for a long moment, his 6 eyes studying Marcus with an intensity that made the human captain feel like a specimen under a microscope. Finally, he spoke. You argue that humanity's chaotic nature is actually a strength rather than a weakness. I argue that what you call chaos might actually be adaptability, Your Majesty. Humans are good at finding new ways to solve old problems because we haven't learned yet that certain things are impossible. Princess Lyraliai stood gracefully from her throne, the movement drawing every eye in the chamber. When she spoke, her voice carried a note of authority that surprised Marcus. Father, I would like to propose a test of Captain Chen's theories. The Emperor's attention shifted to his daughter, and Marcus caught a glimpse of something that might have been pride or concern crossing his features. What sort of test, Lyraliai? The contested zones have remained in stalemate for 40 years despite the Empire's best efforts to resolve the conflicts. Traditional approaches have failed repeatedly, and the situation grows more dangerous each year. If human adaptability and innovation are truly valuable, surely they could contribute to finding a solution. Prince Vorthak's reaction was immediate and hostile. Sister, you cannot seriously suggest sending humans into one of the most sensitive military situations in the Empire. The security implications alone the security implications of leaving the contested zones unresolved are far greater than any risk posed by human involvement, the princess interrupted calmly. Unless you believe that 40 years of failure represent the Empire's best possible performance. The challenge was subtle but unmistakable, and Marcus realized that he was witnessing something far more complex than a diplomatic negotiation. The princess was using his presence to advance some agenda of her own, though he couldn't guess what it might be. Emperor Thaxus considered his daughter's proposal while the entire chamber held its breath. The contested zones were legendary throughout the galaxy as a region where 3 different species claimed the same territory and had been fighting over it for decades. Multiple attempts at mediation had failed, and the conflict had become a symbol of intractable galactic problems. "An interesting suggestion," the Emperor said finally. "However, sending humans alone into such a volatile situation would be irresponsible. They would require Zephyrian oversight and guidance." Princess Lyralii smiled, and Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. "Of course, Father. I volunteer to serve as liaison and ensure that human efforts remain properly coordinated with Imperial interests." The chamber erupted in surprised voices as various dignitaries reacted to this unexpected development. Marcus found himself staring at the princess in shock, wondering what exactly he had gotten himself into. Ambassador Kelphara looked like she was calculating the diplomatic ramifications of a royal Zephyrian working directly with human personnel. Prince Vorthax's objection was swift and vehement. "Lyralii, this is madness. You are heir to the Zephyrian throne, not a field operative. The dangers involved are exactly why this assignment requires someone with both authority and judgment," she replied smoothly. "Lower-ranking officials lack the authority to make necessary decisions quickly, while higher-ranking officials cannot be spared from their existing responsibilities." Marcus realized that the princess had outmaneuvered her brother with elegant precision. By volunteering for what appeared to be a dangerous assignment, she had simultaneously demonstrated her commitment to the Empire's interests and positioned herself as the logical choice for the mission. It was a masterful piece of political maneuvering. Emperor Thaxus studied his daughter for a long moment before turning his attention back to Marcus. "Captain Chen, are you prepared to accept responsibility for proving humanity's worth to the Zephyrian Empire?" The weight of the question pressed down on Marcus like a physical force. He was being asked to speak for his entire species, to stake humanity's future relationship with one of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations on his ability to solve a problem that had defied solution for 40 years. "Yes, Your Majesty. Humans are prepared to do whatever it takes to prove that partnership between our peoples can benefit both sides." "Then, it is decided," the Emperor declared. "Captain Chen and Princess Lyralii will travel to the contested zones with a joint human Zephyrian team. They will have 6 standard months to demonstrate that human methods can succeed where traditional approaches have failed. If they succeed, humanity will be granted full trading rights throughout Zephyrian space. If they fail..." The Emperor left the consequence unspoken, but the implications were clear. Failure would mean not just the end of human-Zephyrian relations, but quite possibly Marcus's life and the princess's disgrace. As the formal session concluded and various dignitaries began filing out of the throne room, Marcus found himself standing alone while his mind raced to process everything that had just happened. In the space of a single conversation, he had gone from trying to preserve existing trade agreements to accepting responsibility for solving one of the galaxy's most notorious conflicts. Princess Lyralii approached him as the chamber emptied, her violet eyes unreadable. When she spoke, her voice was quiet enough that only he could hear. "Captain Chen, I hope you understand the significance of what just occurred." "Your Highness, I'm not sure I understand any of it," Marcus admitted. "Why did you volunteer for this assignment? Why did you support my suggestions when it would have been safer to let the negotiations fail quietly?" She studied his face for a moment before answering. "Because, Captain, I believe that hope might be exactly what the Zephyrian Empire needs, even if we don't realize it yet." Before Marcus could respond, she turned and walked away, leaving him alone in the crystalline chamber with the twin moons of Zephyr Prime shining down through the open ceiling. As he watched her graceful form disappear through the ornate doorway, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just stepped into something far more complex and dangerous than a simple diplomatic mission. The next 6 months would determine not only the future of human-Zephyrian relations, but, quite possibly, the fate of everyone involved in the mission. Marcus had volunteered to prove that humans were good at impossible things. He was about to get the chance to prove it. The journey to the contested zones took 3 days aboard the Zephyrian cruiser Stellar Harmony, and Marcus spent most of that time wondering what he had gotten himself into. The ship itself was a marvel of engineering that put human vessels to shame, with corridors that seemed to grow organically from living metal and observation decks that offered stunning views of hyperspace. But it was the conversations with Princess Lyralii that truly occupied his thoughts. She had insisted on daily briefings about human tactical approaches, and Marcus found himself explaining concepts that he had never really thought about before. How humans approached problems differently, why they were willing to take risks that other species avoided, and what made them effective at finding unconventional solutions. What started as professional discussions gradually became something deeper as the princess demonstrated a genuine curiosity about human nature that went far beyond military applications. "Your species fascinates me, Captain," she said during their final briefing before arrival. They sat in her private quarters, a space that managed to be both luxurious and surprisingly personal. Books from dozens of different worlds filled crystalline shelves, while holographic art pieces shifted through scenes of various planetary landscapes. Most civilizations develop along predictable patterns as they mature. They become more structured, more risk-averse, more concerned with preserving what they have built rather than expanding into new possibilities. Marcus set down his cup of Zephyrian tea, a drink that tasted like starlight and made him slightly lightheaded if he drank too much. "And humans don't follow that pattern? Humans seem to become more chaotic as they develop, not less. Your species has access to technologies that could ensure comfortable lives for all your people, yet you continue to push into dangerous unknown regions of space. You could focus on perfecting what you already know, but instead you invest tremendous resources in projects that may never yield practical benefits." "Maybe that's because comfort isn't the only thing that matters to humans," Marcus suggested. "We need challenges. We need mysteries to solve and frontiers to explore. A life without risk might be safe, but it wouldn't feel like living." Princess Lyralii tilted her head in a gesture that Marcus had learned indicated deep thought. "Is that why you volunteered for this mission? The appeal of an impossible challenge?" The question caught him off guard, partly because he hadn't really considered his motivations that carefully. "I volunteered because someone had to, and because I believed what I told your father about partnership being possible. But you're right that the challenge appeals to me. Humans are competitive by nature. Even when the competition involves life and death stakes?" Marcus met her gaze directly. "Especially then. Humans perform best when everything is on the line because that's when we stop holding back and start taking the kinds of risks that lead to breakthroughs." She was quiet for several moments, her violet eyes studying him with an intensity that made him wonder what she was thinking. Finally, she spoke. "Captain, may I ask you something that might be considered inappropriate by diplomatic standards? After the speech I gave in your father's throne room, I think we're past worrying about diplomatic standards, Your Highness." A smile flickered across her features. "Why do humans form pair bonds the way you do? Most species either mate for reproduction alone or establish complex group relationships that serve multiple social functions. But humans seem to form these intense individual partnerships that often last for life." The personal nature of the question surprised him, but Marcus found himself wanting to answer honestly. "I guess it's because humans need that kind of connection. We're social creatures, but we're also individuals in a way that some species aren't. We need someone who knows us completely, who accepts our flaws and supports our dreams. Someone who chooses to stand beside us not because they have to, but because they want to. And you believe this kind of partnership makes humans stronger rather than weaker?" "Absolutely. Having someone who believes in you completely gives you the courage to attempt things you'd never try alone. It's like having a safety net that allows you to take bigger risks because you know someone will be there to catch you if you fall." Princess Lyralii was silent for so long that Marcus began to worry he had said something offensive. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful rather than challenging. "Zephyrian royalty typically form alliances rather than partnerships. Marriages are arranged to strengthen political positions or consolidate resources. Personal feelings are considered secondary to practical considerations." "That sounds lonely," Marcus said without thinking, then immediately worried that he had overstepped boundaries. But the princess didn't seem offended. Instead, she nodded slowly. "It is lonely, Captain. More lonely than I realized until I began speaking with you about human perspectives. Before Marcus could respond, the ship's communication system chimed with an announcement that they were approaching their destination. The moment of personal connection was broken as they both shifted back into their professional roles, but something had changed between them that Marcus couldn't quite identify. The contested zones looked exactly like what Marcus would expect from a region that had been fought over for 40 years. 3 different fleets hung in space around a cluster of resource-rich worlds, maintaining an uneasy balance that could explode into violence at any moment. The hegemony ships were massive and intimidating, built like floating fortresses designed to overwhelm enemies through sheer firepower. The Syndicate vessels were sleek and fast, clearly optimized for hit-and-run tactics and superior maneuverability. Between them, trying to maintain some semblance of order, were the peacekeeping ships of the Stellar Collective, battered veterans of countless attempts to mediate the seemingly unresolvable conflict. Impressive, Marcus murmured as they studied the tactical displays in the ship's command center. How have they managed to avoid destroying each other for 40 years? Commander Thek, the Zephyrian officer who would be serving as their military liaison, manipulated the holographic display to show the historical progression of the conflict. The balance has been maintained through a series of agreements that prevent any single faction from gaining decisive advantage. Each side controls certain worlds, certain trade routes, certain resource extraction operations. They occasionally engage in limited conflicts to test boundaries, but full-scale war would be mutually destructive. Princess Lyralii studied the display with the focused attention of someone who had received extensive military training. What prevents resolution through negotiation? Each faction has legitimate claims to the territory, Commander Thek explained. The hegemony discovered the region and established the first colonies. The Syndicate invested the most resources in developing the infrastructure and industry. The Collective has the largest population of actual residents who were born in the region and consider it their home. All 3 have valid arguments, and none are willing to accept a settlement that recognizes the other's claims as equal to their own. Marcus studied the display while his mind worked through the implications. So we're dealing with a situation where everyone is right, everyone has something to lose, and nobody trusts anyone else enough to risk compromise. An accurate summary, Princess Lyralii agreed. Traditional negotiation has failed because each side approaches the problem from the perspective of maximizing their own gains while minimizing their losses. What would humans do differently? It was a fair question, and Marcus found himself wishing he had a clear answer. Human history was full of conflicts that had seemed just as intractable before someone found an unexpected solution. The trick was identifying what made those solutions work when conventional approaches had failed. Humans would probably start by changing the fundamental assumptions, he said slowly. Instead of asking how to divide up what exists, we'd ask how to create more value for everyone involved. Commander Thek's expression was skeptical. The resources in dispute are finite. Territory cannot be expanded beyond physical limitations. Maybe not, but the value derived from those resources can definitely be expanded. What if instead of fighting over who controls what, all 3 factions worked together to develop the region more effectively than any of them could manage alone? Cooperation between these groups is impossible, Commander Thek stated flatly. 40 years of conflict have created levels of mistrust that cannot be overcome through good intentions. Princess Lyralii held up a hand to forestall further argument. Commander, Captain Chen is here specifically because conventional approaches have failed. We agreed to test whether human methods might succeed where ours have not. That requires giving those methods a genuine opportunity rather than dismissing them immediately. The rebuke was gentle but unmistakable, and Marcus felt a surge of gratitude toward the princess. She was keeping her word about supporting human approaches even when they contradicted Zephyrian military doctrine. Thank you, Your Highness. Commander Thek, I understand your skepticism, and you're absolutely right that trust can't be created overnight. But what if we started smaller? What if we looked for opportunities where cooperation would benefit all 3 factions without requiring anyone to give up their core positions? Such as? Marcus manipulated the display to highlight the asteroid fields that surrounded several of the disputed worlds. Mining operations in these fields require significant infrastructure investments and carry substantial risks. What if all three factions contributed resources to joint mining operations that would generate more wealth than any of them could extract individually? And why would they agree to share profits when they believe they have the right to claim everything for themselves? It was a valid question, and Marcus knew that his answer would determine whether this approach had any chance of success. He thought about what motivated humans to work together despite their competitive natures. Because shared success is better than individual failure. Right now, all three factions are spending enormous resources on military forces that prevent them from developing the region effectively. If they redirected even part of those resources toward joint development projects, everyone would be better off than they are now. Princess Lyralii leaned forward with obvious interest. How would you convince them to take such a risk? By starting with something small and low stakes where the potential for mutual benefit is obvious and the risk of betrayal is minimal. Success builds trust, and trust enables bigger cooperation. Commander Thek still looked dubious, but he was clearly considering the proposal seriously. What kind of small-scale project would demonstrate mutual benefit without threatening any faction's core interests? Marcus studied the tactical display while ideas began forming in his mind. The key was finding something that all three factions needed but none of them could accomplish efficiently on their own. Emergency response, he said suddenly. All three factions have ships and personnel operating in dangerous conditions. When accidents happen, current protocols require each faction to handle their own emergencies even when other factions could provide assistance more quickly or effectively. You're suggesting joint emergency response protocols? I'm suggesting that saving lives should be more important than political boundaries. Create a joint rescue service that responds to emergencies regardless of which faction is involved. Fund it through contributions from all three groups, staff it with volunteers from all three fleets, and give it absolute priority over military operations. Princess Lyralii's eyes lit up with understanding. Brilliant. It's impossible to argue against saving lives. It requires genuine cooperation to function effectively, and success would demonstrate that the factions can work together when properly motivated. Commander Thek nodded slowly. Such a program would also create personal relationships between individuals from different factions. Shared danger tends to build bonds that transcend political differences. Exactly, Marcus agreed. And, once those relationships exist, it becomes much easier to explore other areas where cooperation might be beneficial. The princess stood and began pacing, a habit Marcus had noticed when she was excited about an idea. We would need to present this proposal in a way that addresses each faction's specific concerns and motivations. The hegemony values strength and honor, so we emphasize how joint rescue operations would demonstrate their commitment to protecting all beings in the region. The syndicate values efficiency and profit, so we focus on how reducing emergency response times would minimize economic losses. The collective values community and cooperation, so we highlight how this program embodies their ideals of mutual support. Your Highness understands the factions well, Commander Thek observed with what might have been approval. I've been studying this conflict for years, Commander. My father believes that understanding our neighbors requires understanding their disputes as well as their strengths. Marcus felt a growing sense of optimism about their mission. The princess clearly had both the knowledge and the authority necessary to make their plan work, while Commander Thek's military expertise would be crucial for addressing practical implementation challenges. What's our next step? He asked. We arrange individual meetings with the faction leaders, Princess Lyralii replied. Commander Thek will handle the formal diplomatic protocols while you and I focus on presenting the proposal in terms that appeal to each group's specific values and concerns. Over the next several days, Marcus got his first real taste of interstellar politics at the highest levels. The faction leaders were all impressive individuals who had survived decades of conflict through combinations of intelligence, determination, and ruthlessness. Admiral Corax of the Hegemony was a massive being whose scarred carapace told stories of countless battles, but who spoke with surprising eloquence about duty and honor. Director Vex of the Syndicate appeared to be mostly mechanical, but her artificial components enhanced rather than replaced a brilliant organic mind that saw opportunities where others saw only problems. Chancellor Moore of the Collective was the most human-like of the three, but her gentle demeanor concealed a will strong enough to unite dozens of different species under a single government. Each meeting followed a similar pattern. Commander Thek would present their credentials and explain their mission in formal diplomatic language. Then, Princess Lyrelii would offer the proposal in terms specifically tailored to that faction's values, and, finally, Marcus would answer practical questions about implementation details. The process was exhausting, but Marcus found himself increasingly impressed by the princess's skill at reading people and adapting her approach to their personalities. The breakthrough came during their meeting with Chancellor Mora, when the collective leader asked a question that cut straight to the heart of their proposal. Your Highness, this emergency response program sounds admirable in principle, but I must ask about your ultimate objectives. Are you genuinely interested in saving lives, or is this simply the first step in a larger Zephyrian plan to establish control over the contested zones? The question hung in the air like an accusation, and Marcus realized that their entire mission might depend on Princess Lyrelii's answer. If the faction leaders believed that the Zephyrians were using humanitarian concerns as cover for imperial expansion, the proposal would fail before it had a chance to prove itself. Princess Lyrelii was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus could see her weighing her response carefully. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of vulnerability that surprised him. Chancellor Mora, I will give you an honest answer even though it may damage our negotiating position. The Zephyrian Empire is indeed interested in the contested zones, but not in the way you might expect. We are interested because this conflict represents everything that is wrong with current galactic politics. Three groups with legitimate grievances spending decades destroying each other instead of building something better together. We see this as a problem that needs solving, not an opportunity that needs exploiting. And what does the Empire gain from solving our problem? Proof that cooperation is possible even in the most difficult circumstances. Evidence that there are alternatives to the endless cycles of conflict that plague so many regions of the galaxy. Hope that intelligence and goodwill can triumph over fear and mistrust. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat as he recognized his own words about hope being reflected in the princess's answer. She was risking her credibility and possibly her safety by admitting that Zephyrian involvement was motivated by idealism rather than pragmatic self-interest. Chancellor Mora studied the princess intently before turning her attention to Marcus. And you, Captain Chen? What does humanity gain from involving itself in our affairs? The chance to prove that partnership between different species can achieve things that none of us could accomplish alone, Marcus replied without hesitation. Humans believe that diversity of thought and approach leads to better solutions than any single perspective could develop. We want to be part of building something better than what exists now. Even if that means risking human lives and resources for conflicts that don't directly affect your people? Marcus met her gaze directly. Especially then, Chancellor. The problems that matter most are usually the ones that affect other people. Chancellor Mora leaned back in her chair, and Marcus caught a glimpse of something that might have been approval in her expression. Your Highness, Captain Chen, I believe your proposal has merit. The collective will participate in your emergency response program, but with conditions. What conditions? Princess Lyrelii asked. First, the program must be genuinely neutral. No faction receives preferential treatment, and no faction's emergency takes priority over another's based on political considerations. Second, all participants must contribute equally in terms of resources and personnel relative to their capabilities. Third, the program must include mechanisms for preventing abuse or manipulation for military advantage. Those seem like reasonable conditions, the princess agreed. Are there others? One more. This program must be allowed to succeed or fail based on its own merits. If it works, we explore expanded cooperation. If it fails, we do not use that failure as justification for returning to purely military solutions. Marcus felt a surge of respect for Chancellor Mora. She was willing to take a risk on cooperation, but she was also ensuring that failure wouldn't make the situation worse than it already was. Agreed, Princess Lyrelii said formally. Chancellor, if you're willing to participate, I believe we can convince the other factions to join as well. The meeting with Director Vex went more smoothly than Marcus had expected. The syndicate leader was primarily interested in the economic benefits of reduced emergency response times and the potential for the program to serve as a model for other joint ventures. Her mechanical components allowed her to process information faster than biological minds, and she quickly identified ways to optimize the program for maximum efficiency. Acceptable proposal, she concluded in the clipped tones that characterized syndicate communication. Participation contingent on cost-benefit analysis maintaining positive projections. Suggests 6-month trial period with full evaluation before permanent implementation. Admiral Corex proved to be the most challenging negotiator, not because he opposed the concept but because he insisted on elaborate protocols to ensure that hegemony honor would not be compromised by working alongside former enemies. Marcus found himself explaining human concepts of honor and courage in terms that translated effectively to hegemony values, while Princess Lyralii demonstrated remarkable patience in addressing the Admiral's concerns about command structure and operational authority. Honor is not diminished by working with others toward worthy goals, the Admiral eventually conceded. The hegemony will participate in this emergency response program, but our personnel will maintain their own chain of command and operational procedures. As they concluded the final negotiation session, Marcus realized that they had actually succeeded in accomplishing something unprecedented. 3 factions that had been fighting each other for 40 years had agreed to work together on a project that required genuine cooperation and mutual trust. Phase 1 complete, Princess Lyralii said as they returned to their ship. Now comes the harder part. Implementation? Making sure this actually works, she replied with a smile that made Marcus's pulse quicken. Captain, are you ready to prove that human optimism was justified? Marcus looked out at the fleet formations that had maintained hostile positions for decades, imagining how different the region might look if cooperation succeeded. Your Highness, I've never been more ready for anything in my life. The first emergency call came 3 weeks into the joint rescue program, and Marcus knew immediately that everything they had worked to build could collapse based on how the next few hours played out. The distress signal originated from a hegemony mining vessel that had suffered catastrophic hull breaches while extracting rare minerals from an unstable asteroid. 47 crew members were trapped in a deteriorating situation, and the nearest hegemony rescue ship was 6 hours away. The Syndicate fast response vessel Prophet Motive was only 90 minutes out, but requesting help from their longtime enemies would be a test of Admiral Corex's commitment to the program. Marcus watched the communication feeds from the joint command center they had established on a neutral space station, his heart pounding as he waited to see whether 40 years of mistrust would override the protocols they had so carefully established. This is Admiral Corex to Joint Emergency Command. The transmission crackled with static from the damaged mining ship's failing communications array. Hegemony vessel Iron Determination requires immediate assistance. Requesting support from nearest available rescue asset regardless of faction affiliation. Marcus felt like cheering, but Princess Lyralii's calm professionalism reminded him that this was only the beginning of the test. The real challenge would be whether the joint response protocols they had developed would work under actual emergency conditions. Admiral, this is Director Vex aboard the Prophet Motive. We are altering course to assist your vessel. Our medical bay is prepared to receive casualties, and our engineering teams are equipped for emergency hull repair. The next 90 minutes passed like 90 hours as Marcus monitored the rescue operation from the command center. Princess Lyralii coordinated between the different factions with calm efficiency, while Commander Thek managed the technical aspects of the rescue. The princess had insisted that human personnel be present during every major operation, both to demonstrate human commitment to the program and to provide different perspectives on problem solving. Captain Chen, she called out as new information appeared on the tactical displays. The Iron Determination is losing atmosphere faster than projected. The Syndicate team estimates they can stabilize the hull, but they'll need additional personnel to evacuate all crew members before the next section fails. Marcus studied the data while his mind raced through options. The collective patrol ship Unity's promise was 2 hours away, but there was another possibility that might work faster. What about the Zephyrian vessels in the region? We have ships with evacuation capabilities that could reach the scene in 40 minutes. Commander Thek looked up from his coordination console. Captain, the emergency protocols specify that joint response takes priority over individual faction assistance. Involving Zephyrian forces could be seen as Imperial interference in the program. It was a valid concern, but Marcus could see another way to interpret the situation. Not if we're functioning as part of the joint response team. The protocols don't prohibit assistance from non-faction vessels, they just require that all assistance be coordinated through the joint command structure.
Princess Lyralii considered the proposal for several seconds before nodding.
Do it, Captain. Contact the Stellar Harmony and request their assistance as auxiliary support for the joint rescue operation.
The next 2 hours provided a masterclass in complex emergency coordination as ships from 4 different factions worked together to save lives.
Marcus found himself serving as translator between different communication protocols and operational procedures, helping teams that had been enemies for decades find ways to work together effectively. The Syndicate engineers performed miracles in stabilizing the damaged hull, while Hegemony crew members demonstrated extraordinary courage in maintaining critical systems despite deteriorating conditions. Zephyrian medical personnel treated injured miners with skills that had been honed through centuries of experience, while collective coordination specialists managed the complex logistics of evacuating personnel to multiple ships. When the last crew member was transferred to safety just minutes before the mining ship's final structural collapse, Marcus realized that they had witnessed something unprecedented in the history of the contested zones. 47 lives had been saved through cooperation between groups that had been shooting at each other for 4 decades.
Remarkable, Admiral Korex said during the post-operation briefing.
His scarred features showed something that might have been wonder. In 40 years of conflict, I have never seen such effective coordination between our forces and those of other factions. The key was clear communication and shared objectives, Director Vex observed.
When all participants focus on saving lives rather than scoring political points, efficiency improves dramatically. Chancellor Mora leaned forward with obvious interest. Director, are you suggesting that this level of cooperation might be applicable to other joint ventures? Data indicates significant potential for expanded collaboration.
Resource extraction operations, infrastructure development, even defensive coordination against external threats could benefit from similar approaches. Marcus exchanged glances with Princess Lyralii, recognizing that they might be witnessing the first steps toward the kind of comprehensive partnership that had seemed impossible just weeks earlier. The princess gave him a subtle nod that indicated she was thinking along the same lines. Perhaps we should explore those possibilities, she suggested carefully.
The emergency response program has demonstrated that cooperation is achievable when properly structured.
It would be wasteful not to investigate whether similar successes are possible in other areas.
Admiral Korex was quiet for several moments before speaking. Princess, are you proposing expanded joint operations between our factions?
I'm proposing that we consider whether the principles that made this rescue successful might be applicable to other challenges facing the contested zones. Surely everyone benefits when resources are developed more efficiently and security is maintained more effectively. Over the following weeks, Marcus watched in amazement as the emergency response program evolved into something much more significant than anyone had originally envisioned. Success bred confidence, and confidence enabled greater risks and more ambitious cooperation. The joint rescue teams began sharing technical innovations that improved their effectiveness, leading to requests for expanded information sharing in other areas. The breakthrough came when Director Vex proposed a joint mining operation to extract resources from an asteroid field that none of the factions could develop individually due to its size and complexity. The project would require unprecedented levels of coordination and resource sharing, but the potential profits were enormous enough to motivate all 3 factions to overcome their traditional mistrust. This is exactly what we hoped would happen, Princess Lyralii said during one of their private briefings.
The factions are beginning to see cooperation as an opportunity rather than a threat.
Marcus nodded, but he was also becoming increasingly aware of complications that went beyond the immediate success of their mission. The more time he spent working closely with the princess, the more he found himself drawn to her intelligence, her compassion, and her genuine commitment to making the galaxy a better place. She was everything he had ever admired in a person, and he was beginning to realize that his feelings for her went far beyond professional respect.
Your Highness, may I ask you something personal?
She looked up from the report she had been reviewing, her violet eyes focusing on him with an intensity that made his heart race.
Of course, Captain. Why was this mission so important to you? I understand the diplomatic benefits for the Zephyrian Empire, but you've invested far more personal effort than duty alone would require.
Princess Lyralii was quiet for several moments, and Marcus worried that he had overstepped appropriate boundaries. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than usual. Because I needed to know whether the alternatives I had imagined were actually possible. For my entire life, I have been told that effective leadership requires accepting the world as it is rather than wasting energy on idealistic fantasies. I was taught that cooperation between hostile factions was impossible, that trust could not be built across species barriers, and that lasting peace was a naive dream.
And, now I have seen 40 years of conflict transformed into genuine partnership in a matter of weeks. I have watched former enemies risk their lives to save each other. I have witnessed the birth of something new and better than what existed before.
Marcus felt his chest tighten with emotion as he recognized the hope in her voice. This was why he had been drawn to her from their first meeting, why working with her felt like the most natural thing in the world. She shared his belief that things could be better than they were, his willingness to take risks for the chance at something extraordinary.
Princess, what happens when our mission is complete? When we return to report our success to your father?
The question seemed to pain her, and she turned away to look out the observation port at the stars.
I return to my duties as heir to the Zephyrian throne.
I prepare to someday rule an empire that spans a quarter of the galaxy. I fulfill the obligations that come with my birth and position.
And, is that what you want?
She was quiet for so long that Marcus began to think she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. What I want has never been relevant to my destiny, Captain. I am not free to choose my path the way humans are free to choose theirs. Marcus felt something break inside his chest at the sadness in her voice. Without thinking about protocol or consequences, he moved closer to where she stood. Princess, everyone deserves the chance to choose their own happiness.
Even royalty.
Especially royalty, because your choices affect so many other people. She turned to face him, and Marcus was shocked to see tears in her violet eyes.
Marcus, do you truly believe that partnership between individuals can overcome any obstacle, the way you described it to my father?
The use of his first name sent electricity through his entire body, but it was the vulnerability in her expression that made him step even closer. I believe that two people who truly care about each other can find ways to build something beautiful together, even when the odds seem impossible.
Even when one of those people is heir to an empire and the other is a human captain from a world that has barely begun to explore the galaxy?
The question hung between them like a bridge over an impossible chasm. Marcus knew that his answer would change everything, that there would be no going back once he crossed this line. But, looking into her eyes, seeing the hope and fear and desperate longing there, he realized that he had already made his choice.
Especially then, Lyrelii. Especially then,
She stepped forward until there was barely any space between them, her hand reaching up to touch his face gently.
Marcus, if I asked you to help me find a way to choose my own destiny rather than accepting the one chosen for me, would you say yes?
He covered her hand with his own, marveling at how perfectly her fingers fit against his palm.
I would say yes to anything you asked, Princess. Anything at all.
Then, I need to tell you something that will change everything about our mission and, possibly our lives. Before Marcus could ask what she meant, the communication system chimed with an urgent message from the Joint Command Center. Director Vex's mechanical voice filled the cabin with news that made Marcus's blood run cold. Princess Lyrelii, Captain Chen, we have received intelligence that external forces are mobilizing to intervene in the contested zones.
A battle fleet of unknown composition and intent is approaching the region. All joint operations are suspended pending assessment of the new threat.
Marcus felt the bottom drop out of his stomach as he realized that their success might have attracted exactly the kind of attention they couldn't afford. Someone had noticed that the contested zones were becoming stable and prosperous, and they apparently intended to do something about it.
How much time do we have?
Princess Lyrelii asked, her voice steady despite the shock of the development. Estimated arrival in 72 hours, Your Highness. Fleet composition suggests significant military capability, but we cannot identify the ships or determine their objectives. As the communication ended, Marcus found himself staring at the princess while his mind raced through implications. Everything they had worked to build was about to be tested by forces they didn't understand and couldn't predict.
Lyrelii, what did you need to tell me? What could change everything about our mission?
She looked up at him with an expression that combined determination, fear, and something else he couldn't quite identify.
That I love you, Marcus-chan.
And that I believe our partnership could change not just the contested zones, but the entire galaxy, if we're brave enough to fight for it. The confession hit him like a physical blow, and Marcus realized that his feelings for her were matched by her feelings for him. But before he could respond, before he could tell her that he loved her too, the tactical displays began flashing with alerts as long-range sensors detected the approaching fleet. Whatever was coming for them, they would face it together. And, somehow, that made even an impossible situation seem manageable. "Princess," he said softly, taking her hand in his.
"I love you too.
And, I promise you this, whatever happens in the next 72 hours, we'll find a way to build the kind of future we both want. Together." She squeezed his hand tightly, and Marcus saw determination replace the fear in her eyes. "Together," she agreed.
"No matter what it costs."
As alarms began sounding throughout the ship and emergency protocols activated across the joint fleet, Marcus realized that their real test was just beginning. They had proven that cooperation was possible, but now they would have to prove that it was strong enough to survive whatever threatened to destroy it. The next 3 days would determine not only the fate of the contested zones, but the future of everyone who had dared to believe that peace was possible between former enemies. And, somehow, Marcus knew that the success or failure of that defense would depend as much on the strength of the bond between him and Princess Lyralii as on the military capabilities of their combined fleets. Love, it turned out, might be the most powerful weapon in their arsenal. The attacking fleet that emerged from hyperspace 57 hours later was unlike anything Marcus had seen in his years of interstellar travel. Dozens of massive black ships moved in perfect formation, their hulls seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. No identifying markings, no response to communication attempts, and, most disturbing of all, no detectable energy signatures from their weapons or shields despite their obvious military configuration. "Analysis complete, Your Highness," Commander Thek reported from the Joint Command Center they had established aboard the neutral station. "Fleet composition suggests advanced stealth technology and weapons systems beyond current galactic standards. No match for any known military designs in our databases." Marcus studied the tactical displays while his mind raced through possibilities. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Someone had waited until the joint cooperation program was showing real success before making their move, which suggested that the attackers opposed the idea of peace in the contested zones rather than simply wanting to claim territory for themselves. "Princess, I think we're dealing with someone who benefits from the current conflict continuing indefinitely," he said quietly. "Arms dealers, mercenary organizations, maybe even a government that uses the contested zones as a training ground for their military forces." Princess Lyralii nodded grimly. "That was my assessment as well. The question is whether our joint defense capabilities are sufficient to repel an attack from forces we cannot identify or predict." Admiral Corex's scarred features were set in grim determination as he reviewed the fleet dispositions. "Your Highness, in 4 decades of warfare, the 3 factions have never successfully coordinated defensive operations. Our ships are designed for different tactical approaches, our communication protocols are incompatible, and our commanders have no experience working together under combat conditions. Then, we'll have to learn fast," Director Vex stated with mechanical precision. "Data indicates that individual faction capabilities are insufficient to repel the attacking force. Joint operations represent our only viable option for survival." Chancellor Mora leaned forward with concern obvious in her expression. "Director, even if we can coordinate our defensive efforts, we're asking personnel who have been enemies for 40 years to suddenly trust each other with their lives. The psychological barriers may be insurmountable." Marcus felt a spark of inspiration as he remembered something from human military history. Not if we give them something bigger than their old conflicts to focus on. Humans have a saying, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." Right now, those black ships are the enemy of everyone in this region. "Explain," Princess Lyralii requested. "Instead of asking the factions to trust each other, we ask them to protect what they've all worked to build over the past few weeks. The joint rescue program, the cooperative mining operations, the partnerships that are making everyone more prosperous and secure. They're not fighting for their old enemies, they're fighting for their new future."
Admiral Corex was quiet for several moments before nodding slowly. Captain Chen speaks wisdom. My people have seen the benefits of cooperation. They will fight to preserve those benefits, even if it means standing beside former foes. Same here, Director Vex agreed. Economic analysis supports defensive cooperation. Potential losses from allowing the region to return to chaos exceed costs of joint military operations. Chancellor Mora's approval was more emotional but equally firm. The collective will not allow unknown forces to destroy the peace we have worked so hard to achieve. Our people will stand with our new allies. Princess Lyralii took a deep breath before speaking. Then, it's decided. We coordinate joint defensive operations using combined fleet capabilities and hope that cooperation proves as effective in warfare as it has been in rescue operations. The next 18 hours were a masterclass in improvised military coordination as commanders who had been shooting at each other for decades suddenly had to figure out how to work together against a common threat. Marcus found himself serving as translator between different tactical philosophies, helping hegemony aggression coordinate with syndicate mobility and collective defensive strategies. The breakthrough came when Admiral Corex proposed a battle plan that used each faction's strengths to compensate for the other's weaknesses. Hegemony heavy cruisers would anchor defensive positions and draw enemy fire while syndicate fast attack vessels struck at vulnerable points and disrupted enemy formations. Collective coordination ships would manage communications and logistics while Zephyrian vessels provided mobile reserves and specialized support capabilities. It's actually brilliant, Marcus told Princess Lyralii during their final planning session. Instead of trying to make all the factions fight the same way, we're creating a combined approach that makes their differences into advantages. She smiled with pride and affection that made his heart race despite the approaching danger. Human tactical thinking applied to alien military capabilities. I think my father would be impressed by the innovation. Lyralii, about what you told me before the fleet arrived. About loving me and wanting to choose your own destiny. Once this battle is over, we need to talk about what that means and how we can make it work. Her expression grew serious. Marcus, I need you to understand something about Zephyrian royal succession. As heir to the throne, I am expected to form political alliances through marriage. My betrothal to Prince Corvin of the Stellar Federation was arranged before my birth and confirmed on my 18th birthday. Marcus felt like he had been punched in the stomach. You're already engaged? Formally, yes. But the marriage ceremony has been delayed repeatedly due to various political considerations. If I can demonstrate that an alternative arrangement would serve the Empire's interests better than the traditional approach, my father might be persuaded to reconsider. And how would we demonstrate that? By proving that the partnership between humans and Zephyrians could transform galactic politics. By showing that love and mutual respect can create stronger alliances than political calculation and strategic convenience. Before Marcus could respond, the communication system erupted with alerts as the attacking fleet began its final approach. Whatever conversation they might have had would have to wait until they survived the next few hours. The battle began with a coordinated assault from the unknown ships that tested every aspect of the joint defense plan they had developed. Marcus watched from the command center as formations that had never fought together struggled to maintain coordination under the stress of actual combat. Communication delays, incompatible targeting systems, and 40 years of ingrained mistrust created chaos that the attackers exploited ruthlessly. We're losing coherence on the left flank, Commander Thek reported as explosions lit up the tactical display. Hegemony and collective forces are falling back independently instead of maintaining mutual support. Princess Lyralii activated the emergency communication channel that connected her directly to all fleet commanders. All units, this is Princess Lyralii. Remember what you're fighting for. Not just territory, not just resources, but the future you've all worked to build together. Trust your allies the way they trusted you during rescue operations. Stand together now the way you stood together to save lives. Her words seemed to have an immediate effect as the retreating formations began coordinating their withdrawal and re-establishing defensive positions. Marcus felt a surge of pride watching her command presence inspire courage in beings from multiple species who had only recently been enemies. The tide of battle shifted when Director Vex identified a pattern in the attackers' movements that suggested their coordination was being managed by a central command ship hidden among the fleet. If they could disable that ship, the entire attacking force might lose its tactical coherence. Target identified, Admiral Corex announced grimly. But reaching it will require a concentrated assault through heavily defended space. Casualty projections are severe. Then, we use human tactics, Marcus said suddenly, an idea forming in his mind. Instead of a direct assault, we create a diversion that draws their defenses away from the command ship. What kind of diversion? Chancellor Mora asked. A fake retreat that makes them think we're abandoning our positions. When they move forward to exploit what they believe is our collapse, a strike force hidden among the retreating ships attacks the command vessel. Princess Lyralii studied the proposal for several seconds before nodding. Risky, but potentially effective. Admiral, are you willing to trust human tactical innovation? At this point, Princess, human innovation may be our only hope for survival. The feinted retreat was one of the most terrifying experiences of Marcus's life. Watching friendly ships appear to flee in panic while actually positioning themselves for a coordinated strike required nerves of steel and absolute trust between forces that had been enemies just weeks earlier. The attacking fleet took the bait perfectly, surging forward to exploit what they believed was the collapse of the joint defense. When Admiral Corex led the hidden strike force against the command ship, the battle became a masterpiece of improvised coordination. Hegemony heavy weapons disabled the vessel's shields while Syndicate precision strikes targeted critical systems and collective boarding parties secured key areas. The command ship's destruction sent cascading failures through the entire attacking fleet as individual vessels lost coordination and began fighting independently rather than as a unified force. Enemy fleet is withdrawing, Commander Thek announced as the surviving black ships broke off their attack and began retreating toward the edge of the system. Joint defensive operations have achieved complete tactical success. The cheer that went up from the command center was echoed across the entire joint fleet as crews that had worked together to achieve the impossible celebrated their shared victory. Marcus found himself swept up in the emotional release as weeks of tension and fear gave way to triumphant joy. But it was Princess Lyralii's reaction that moved him most deeply. She stood quietly watching the tactical displays as the attacking fleet disappeared into hyperspace, her expression showing a mixture of relief, pride, and something else that took Marcus a moment to identify. Wonder. She was looking at the joint fleet formations with absolute wonder, as if seeing something miraculous that she had never imagined possible. They did it, she whispered, her voice filled with awe. Beings who had been killing each other for 40 years just risked their lives to save each other. They chose cooperation over conflict, trust over fear, hope over despair. Marcus moved to stand beside her, taking her hand in his as they watched former enemies coordinating recovery operations with the same efficiency they had shown during battle. No, Lyralii. We did it. All of us, together. You believed it was possible, I helped figure out how to make it work, and they had the courage to try something completely different. She turned to face him with tears of joy streaming down her face. Marcus, do you realize what this means? If cooperation this complete is possible here, in the most intractable conflict in the galaxy, then it's possible anywhere. We've proven that there are alternatives to the endless cycles of war and mistrust that plague so many regions. And we've proven that love and partnership can achieve things that political calculation never could, Marcus added softly. Lyralii, what happens now? Do you return to your arranged marriage and traditional royal duties? Her expression grew determined in a way that made Marcus's heart race with hope. No, Marcus. I choose a different path. I choose partnership with someone who shares my dreams and my values. I choose love over duty, hope over tradition, and the future we can build together over the past that others chose for me. Even if it means giving up your claim to the Zephyrian throne? Especially if it means that. Marcus, I've seen what's possible when two people who truly care about each other work toward common goals. I've seen how love can transform not just individuals but entire civilizations. I want to spend my life building that kind of future with you. Before Marcus could respond, the communication system activated with a transmission from the Zephyrian capital.
Emperor Thaxus appeared on the main display, his 6 eyes focusing on his daughter with an expression Marcus couldn't read.
Lyralii, reports indicate that your mission has achieved unprecedented success.
The joint defense of the contested zones represents a diplomatic breakthrough of historical significance.
Yes, Father. The cooperation between former enemies proved even more effective than we had hoped. And this success was achieved through partnership between you and Captain Chen?
Marcus felt his blood turn cold as he realized that the Emperor somehow knew about their personal relationship. Princess Lyralii lifted her chin with royal dignity.
Captain Chen's insights into human cooperative methods were essential to our success, yes.
Emperor Thaxus was quiet for several moments, his gaze shifting between his daughter and Marcus. When he finally spoke, his voice carried undertones that Marcus couldn't interpret.
Then, perhaps it is time for the Zephyrian Empire to consider new approaches to diplomacy and alliance building.
Captain Chen, you will accompany my daughter when she returns to present your full report.
I believe we have much to discuss.
As the transmission ended, Marcus realized that their real test was just beginning. They had proven that cooperation was possible between enemies, but now they had to prove that love was possible between species separated by impossible barriers. Looking into Princess Lyralii's violet eyes, seeing the determination and hope there, Marcus knew that they would find a way to make it work. After all, humans were good at impossible things.
And, apparently, so was she.
The journey back to the Zephyrian capital took 5 days, and Marcus spent most of that time preparing for what might be the most important conversation of his life. Princess Lyralii had made her choice clear, but convincing Emperor Thaxus that their partnership served the Empire's interests better than traditional political arrangements would require every diplomatic skill Marcus had developed. What complicated matters was the growing realization that their success in the contested zones had attracted attention from across the galaxy. Representatives from dozens of different species had requested meetings to discuss applying similar cooperative approaches to their own regional conflicts. The Stellar Federation, the Thoraxian Collective, even the isolationist Crystalline Hegemony had expressed interest in learning more about human tactical thinking and Zephyrian diplomatic innovation. Marcus, I need you to understand what we're walking into, Princess Lyralii said during their final private conversation before reaching Zephyr Prime. My father is not just an emperor, he's a being who has maintained stability across hundreds of worlds for over a century. Every decision he makes is evaluated based on its impact on billions of subjects and the long-term survival of the empire.
I understand the stakes, Lyralii.
But I also understand that we've proven something important about the power of genuine partnership. If we can convince him that our relationship represents a new model for interspecies cooperation rather than just a personal choice, we might have a chance. She smiled with the mixture of affection and determination that had first drawn Marcus to her. Then, we present our case based on results rather than emotions. We show him that love and mutual respect create stronger alliances than political calculation and strategic convenience. The throne room looked exactly as Marcus remembered it, but everything else had changed. Instead of the tense diplomatic gathering he had encountered months earlier, the crystalline chamber now hosted representatives from across the galaxy who had come to observe the formal presentation of their mission results. Marcus recognized ambassadors from major powers, military observers from neutral factions, and trade representatives whose presence suggested that the economic implications of the contested zones resolution were already being felt throughout interstellar commerce. Emperor Thaxus dominated the central throne with the same absolute authority Marcus remembered, but there was something different in his expression as he watched his daughter enter the chamber. Pride, certainly, but also curiosity about how this situation would resolve itself. Prince Vorthak stood to his father's left, his scarred features showing skepticism that bordered on hostility as his gaze settled on Marcus. The prince clearly disapproved of his sister's choices and the human influence on imperial policy. Princess Lyralii, Captain Chen, the Emperor began formally, you will present your complete report on the mission to the contested zones, including detailed analysis of the methods employed and their potential applications to other regional conflicts. Princess Lyralii stepped forward with royal grace, but Marcus noticed that she positioned herself so they were standing side by side rather than maintaining the traditional distance between royalty and commoners. Your Imperial Majesty, honored representatives, our mission achieved complete success through the application of cooperative principles that transformed 40 years of conflict into sustainable peace and mutual prosperity. For the next hour, she presented a comprehensive overview of everything they had accomplished, from the initial emergency response program through the joint mining operations to the successful defense against unknown attackers. Her presentation was masterful, combining precise technical details with compelling narratives that illustrated the human element behind their success. When she finished, the chamber was silent for several moments before Emperor Thaxus spoke.
Remarkable achievements, certainly.
But, I am most interested in the methodology that made such cooperation possible between groups with seemingly irreconcilable differences. It was Marcus's turn to speak, and he knew that everything depended on how well he could explain human approaches to beings whose entire civilization was built on different principles. Your Majesty, the key was changing fundamental assumptions about the nature of conflict resolution. Instead of trying to determine who was right and who was wrong, we focused on creating situations where everyone could be right simultaneously.
Explain. Traditional negotiation assumes that one side's gain must come at the other side's expense.
Human approaches assume that properly structured cooperation can create benefits for everyone involved that exceed what any single party could achieve alone.
Prince Vorthak leaned forward with obvious challenge in his voice.
Captain, you speak of cooperation as if it were simply a matter of good intentions. How do you account for the practical realities of conflicting interests and incompatible goals? Marcus had been expecting this question and had his answer ready. Your Highness, conflicting interests only remain incompatible when viewed from limited perspectives. When you expand the scope of consideration to include longer-term benefits and creative solutions, apparent contradictions often resolve themselves.
Provide a specific example.
The three factions in the contested zones all claimed exclusive rights to the same territory. Traditional negotiation would have required determining which claim was most valid and forcing the others to accept reduced positions. Our approach was to create joint operations that made all three claims simultaneously valid by ensuring that everyone benefited more from cooperation than any of them could have gained from exclusive control. Ambassador Kelthera from Earth's diplomatic corps stepped forward with a question that surprised Marcus. Captain Chen, your success in the contested zones has generated significant interest throughout human space. Many of our colonial governments are requesting similar assistance with their own interspecies relationships.
How would you recommend scaling these approaches to larger applications?